Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform dedicated to sharing breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the meats industry. On each episode, we will hear from meat specialists and professionals to talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, food safety, and so much more.
Hello, me folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. Today, we are going to dive into pork quality. I know, I think it's been a while since we last spoke about pork quality, and I think it's a good opportunity. And who else? We have Brandon Fields, Global Director in Applied Meat Science, with us today. Welcome, Brandon. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Francisco, for having me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. I think this is overdue. I think there's a lot of topics that when it comes to genetics, when it comes to bird quality. I would like to start off by just talking a little bit about the evolution of bird quality in the meat industry. I know with all your role at PIC, you help a lot of processors, and not only in United States but overseas, and we're just talking about that, and maybe you can explain to our audience a little bit about your role, and to start off with, and we can just talk about this topic. That I'm super excited.
Sure. So my role as global director of the Applied Meat Science group for PIC, it's really mostly a technical services role. There's some components where I work with our teams on internal commercial research. I do some projects with our genetic improvement team as far as looking at new traits or inclusion of meat quality criteria into the genetic selection program. But the vast majority of my time is spent interacting with our customers and the plants in terms of helping them optimize their pork quality. As PIC, as a swine genetics company, our goal is to produce the best pig possible. And so we create that pig with certain levels or expectations, certain genetic potential, and that's includes things obviously like growth rate or carcass leanness, but also from a meat quality standpoint. So really, I'm working with those customers, those end users, so to speak, of the genetics that are converting that pig to pork, and helping them realize that genetic potential. When we look at genetics impact on meat quality, unfortunately, it's only about 25% of the final product quality. The rest is environmental influences. So the better we can understand those interactions, the better we can manage those processes, ultimately the higher quality pork we're going to present to the consumer.
Let's talk a little bit about the environmental factors. Can you at least list some of them so our audience can understand more about it?
Absolutely. There's pretty much anything we do to the pig ultimately has some level of impact on the final product quality. So from an environmental standpoint, you think of things like the nutrition, right? Obviously, we can make the pig fatter and leaner. In some situations, that's considered a quality attribute. There's not a lot of feed additives that can be used that truly and significantly impact meat quality. Although, there are at times things that work. We know for a fact things like, antioxidant feeding and vitamin E, for example. Now, the inclusion rates that make significant impacts in quality might not always be economically feasible, but these are certainly things that we're looking at. One of the biggest environmental factors that we try to focus on is animal handling and welfare. Limiting that antemortem stress in the animal, as we're dealing with pigs and pork, right? We're dealing with a lot of glycolytic fibers in the loin, trying to, reduce that stress, stop that anaerobic metabolism, not get it started before we have to, is really a key driver in managing that. So that really goes all the way back to the farm level. And when it's time to load pigs, all the way through, especially the lairage area and the final movement of pigs from the lairage pen to the stunning area. These are really the most critical times. A little bit of impacts throughout the harvest plant. But again, once we get into that chilling process, that's super critical for that development of pork quality in terms of managing that, again, that that postmortem glycolysis and controlling that rate of pH decline. The quicker we can chill those carcasses, the better quality we're going to get. So really working with that whole chain of events there, kind of from pig to pork, is really what's going to all work together and make a better product at the end.
I really liked the statement on the glycolytic fibers, and I think we can elaborate more on maybe the role of genetics when it comes to the muscle fiber. We spoke with Dr. Gonzalez on a previous episode, and we spoke a lot of topics, but including on the muscle fibers. But can you tell us about, this relationship between genetics and pork quality? And I think we can just go from there.
Yeah. So, from a muscle fiber standpoint, we're not actively selecting for, as in we're not measuring on a routine basis muscle fiber content and structure. We kind of check it and make sure we're maintaining and not going off in a weird direction through anything else or a correlated response. But we're working with pigs, so when we're working with pigs, we're working with a very high proportion of those type 2 glycolytic fibers, in especially in the loin and certain muscles of the ham. When you compare that to beef, which has a much higher proportion of the type 1 or the red oxidative fibers, you simply get a different animal. So you don't get it with chicken. I think people understand chickens are different. We do get a lot of sometimes misunderstanding, thinking that, oh, this is how we do it in beef, so we can do it the same way in pigs. And it's simply not true. From the genetic standpoint, the things that we're trying to improve, that we're selecting for, because we've got that higher amount of glycolytic fibers and that glycolytic potential, is really the control of the rate and the extent of pH decline. We can go back 20 years, and if you want to talk about glycolytic potential, to the RN gene, pretty much definitely within PIC and almost every other genetics company out there, that RN gene has been removed from the populations somewhere around, I think it was 2001. We developed that RN test for the specific site mutation, and we selected that out of the population within probably 3 years. Other genetics companies simply eliminated the Hampshire lines, which was the breed predominantly responsible for the RN gene in their selection programs. We chose to breed it out, but really, since then, we haven't had any major gene breakthroughs. So it's really simply about understanding certain markers have some influence, but overall, it's good old-fashioned quantitative genetics, right? Selecting the higher and the better ones for the next generation and continuing the process throughout. So from a PIC standpoint and pork quality, if you want to be into specific factors that we're looking at, so we do look at lactate production in terms of stress and a stress response to that. So that's kind of giving us some of that postmortem glycolysis issue going on there. We look at pH. We're measuring and selecting for pH. We've been doing this for about 22 years at this point, of including ultimate pH into our breeding objectives. We utilize ultrasound technologies on the farm, and then some, progeny testing programs to evaluate intramuscular fat and select for that. And just recently, about 4 years ago now, we started direct measurement or direct selection for tenderness through the use of Warner Bressler shear force.
I like the fact that you went 20 years back. That helps us go to the next question on the evolution of pork quality. And we can lean towards the global market. How's the pork quality, and I like we talk about global markets and we start talking about yield and values and some of the countries that accept or not accept certain values. So I guess we can expand on this topic of the global market. What's the importance of pork quality when it comes to exporting to Asia? And I think from there, you can give us a little bit of history and the evolution of where we're at right now.
Yeah, sure. I've been actively working in the industry for about 25 years. And if you want to consider some internships I had through my college career,
Absolutely.
probably 27 years of focusing and being in this area. So, the whole evolution of carcass quality, right? So payment, switching from a live pig to a carcass weight and measuring lean and giving some premiums, that all happened in the early 90s. That was a little before me. But certainly some of this migration toward the quality attributes certainly focused around Asian export, Japan at the beginning, Korea as well now, these higher quality Asian markets. We really got serious about that probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that drove, I think, the great deal of this quality development and quality focus in our industry. Prior to that, it was just straight tonnage. If you wanted to compare globally, we were probably a little more like a German market. Everybody was using Pietrin type pigs for carcass conformation and lean percentage, and that was the direction the whole industry was going. Once some of these export markets that were more focused on quality opened up, that's when we really started realizing that, well, maybe we going a little too fast or too far in that direction, and we need to bring things back to a quality, to a consumer focus. The first trait that people started to push, and that was the key driver, was color. So moving the pork color standards to a 3 or better on the Japanese color scale really became important. So we started looking at what we can do there. Some of that was easy fixes. That sort of moved on once the industry kind of cured, to the most part, I say cured or corrected the color issues we were having. And some of that's technology, some of it's genetic, some of it's just better focus on the overall, goal and the outcome. We kind of moved it into firmness of the loin. When you start thinking about physical firmness and the rigidity of the loin, intramuscular fat has been there off and on throughout in terms of those export markets and the desire for that visual, 2, 3, 4% IMF for those markets. Then you came into probably the mid 2000s, late 2000s, somewhere around 2008 or so. We started feeding a lot of the ethanol market, right? Kind of kicked in from gasoline and oil, and using ethanol and distillers, or for gasoline, which left us with a lot of distillers byproducts, DDGS, distiller grain solubles. And that started being used as a pig feed. And we realized we're having a fat quality challenge. This sort of showed up probably first in bacon processing, the concerns, but we realized it's also impacting our export pork quality, so our fresh pork. So when we feed these higher oil energy sources, you mentioned IV or iodine value, right? When you're feeding products with a higher iodine value or more unsaturated fat, then you start to see those implications in the carcass. Essentially, a pig is what it eats in terms of fat. So when we feed more unsaturated fat, they produce more unsaturated fat, which is softer and yellower and somewhat not appealing. Certainly in things like fresh bellies, as I mentioned, for bacon, but also if you're producing single rib bellies for export, this was a major concern is the fat quality. So again, time for the industry to get together, correct the issues, start measuring. So at this point, that most of the packers in the U.S. are measuring iodine value to understand where that is. Producers have learned how to adjust those feeds, so still be able to utilize those lower cost ingredients to some extent, but not compromise the overall carcass value. So we've kind of, transitioned back now to, again, let's continue to drive and push and focus on that lean muscle quality. And, pH throughout has been an important factor. And again, it's all really driving toward probably not only the Asian export market at this point, certainly from a North America standpoint, but really how do we also increase the quality for food service, for just regular retail for all consumers. When you look globally, depending on which country, which region we're at, those product needs are a little different, or they've evolved, I would say in most cases, a little behind the United States. But, we've got different focuses when we're dealing with a lot of the dry cured ham production in Europe, for example. Right. So fat quality has always been very important for them. They actually don't want as high of a pH product as we might in the United States, because they need to lose the water through the curing process so that product will go ahead and cure properly and dry out and ultimately be the higher quality product. So more of a moderate pH level is what their goals are, rather than pushing the upper limits. And when you get into the Latin America, in different countries, right? Mexico is really good and developing quite a bit in terms of high quality product exports to that Asian market, to Japan, to Korea. Chile is really good at doing that. The Brazilian market's coming around and developing quite quickly and focusing on some of those markets as well. When we get beyond that, there's lots of different things, but again, every unique region has its unique products and needs, but really trying to, I see the whole industry as bringing it up and being much more globally competitive rather than regional.
I like the quote that you said, the pig is what it eats, and in terms of fat quality, mm-hmm. Of course. And I think that's I'd like to touch on some of these drivers. And again, what did the company? I mean, the industry had to come together and tackle this issue, right? We talking about the distilled grains, and it was an issue in the industry. So they came together with academia and industry. And I would like to know more about what this approach was. So in terms of some of the practices or technologies out there to mitigate this issue.
So, yeah, again, this started probably around 2008, 9, 10. We were definitely getting in the middle of it. Probably different companies started really focusing on it at different times. But as an industry, like I said, we started to realize that as these corn became more expensive, corn was being used in other capacities, we had more alternative feed sources available. We started to see that there were some challenges in the quality. And, we say DDGs often gets a bad rap, but, yes, it's certainly a different fatty acid profile. It's not necessarily a different fatty acid profile than regular corn, but there's a lot more of the fat in it. So that's really what we have to understand, is what is driving this change in our diets is the total fat in the diet, not just the fat source, but they both work together and in concert. So what we started to do is we looked at it genetically, we looked at it nutritionally, we looked at it environmentally and other factors. And there's been a lot of work by a lot of different people focusing on this, but really when you start thinking of everything it is, the nutrition component is by far your biggest driver. Can you genetically select for different fatty acid profiles? Yes. Can you make a great deal of improvement in a short amount of time? Absolutely not. Simply the heritability of those individual fatty acid profiles is quite low. It's there. It is heritable to a point, but it's not easy to make change. We looked at all sorts of aspects beyond just the diet itself. Heavier pigs have better fat, have a lower iodine value or more saturated fat. Fatter pigs have better fat profiles. So typically when you get a heavier pig, you also get a fatter pig, so you get a bump. Feed form can make a difference. We found about a 2 iodine value unit difference between a mash or a pelleted feed. So if you're feeding a mash feed, you actually get a better iodine value, a lower value, more saturated fat than if you feed a pelleted diet. We can speculate on why that is, but
no, but I think you're right on this, and you're right on. But in terms of meat quality, I mean, we talk about these iodine values, and for audience, what does that mean for meat quality in terms of firmness, in terms of maybe more prone to oxidation, or how can we translate that into a more layman's terms so we can understand more about the topic?
Sure. We're talking a lot about iodine value, saturated and unsaturated fat. Iodine value is simply a way to measure the level of saturated or the ratio of saturated, unsaturated fats. The goal in pork quality is for more saturated fat in the pork. That's probably why your doctor tells you it's bad for you sometimes, because as humans, we think we want more unsaturated fats in our diets. But really the difference here is fat is soft and firm. It's white and yellow at the extreme. So when we think of a ideal pork fat, one that's more saturated, it's bright white, it's very firm, it's smooth. When we get undesirable fat, because we've moved into a higher proportion of those unsaturated fatty acids, that's when we start to see some discoloration. It starts to transition more to a yellowish color of the fat, not that pretty bright white. It becomes almost watery, not smooth and fat filled cells. The fat cells themselves could potentially fill with a water, even if you have too little fat. And so getting to those levels of firmness and appearance from the practical impacts it has, not just from the visual appearance, when we have that nice, hard, saturated fat, it's very easy to slice when we make bacon, right? Everybody eats bacon. Everybody knows bacon slices are pretty thin. We want it nice and smooth. I'm sure you've also seen those bacon. You've bought bacon. You try to pull it out of the package, and that 12-inch slice is now a 24-inch slice by the time you get it pulled out of the package. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. So will you consider that to be like a negative impact of firmness right on that production line, right?
Yes. Right. And it also prevents you from, the slicer. When they're trying to slice this bacon at very high speed, that softer fat kind of gets stuck in the slicer. It balls up. It doesn't slice as cleanly and smoothly. So your yields go down. Not as impactful when you're making bacon bits, but it certainly gets rid of all those nice prime center cut bacon slices that we all love.
Okay. So you consider when a meat processor reaches out to you and asks, like, I have this issue with fat firmness or softness in this case, and they want to know an answer. Will you lean more on the nutrition side of things than genetics, right? Because that's what you're implying on this.
Yeah, almost always the first thing we're going to do is look at the nutrition. So we're going to look at the protein to fat ratios. We're going to look at the dietary ingredients as terms of what are they using for an energy source, what, if anything, are they using for an additional fat source, what's the overall fat content in the diet, and working through that and trying to manage it. Are they using other types of metabolic modifiers like ractopamine or some of these things which will decrease overall fat content and ultimately increase the iodine value or increase the level of unsaturated fats in the diet.
Right. I got like 10 more questions for you, but I'm sure I'll love to have a second part of this conversation during RMC this year with you. I'm sure you're gonna be there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yes. So we'll be recording some of these episodes, and I would like to have Dr. Bass insight on this conversation as well. Before we wrap it up, would you tell us a little bit about you, about your background? We're talking about some of your education at Purdue, and how did you end up at PAC?
So, as I said earlier, I've been at PIC 25 years. I graduated Purdue University with a Bachelor of Science in Animal Science degree. I did not go to graduate school. As we were talking, some days I'm really glad, and some days I really wish I did. So, it's a nice trade-off. But, I spent 3.5 years working at the meats laboratory at Purdue University. So really got a lot involved with a lot of research projects and different things there. I did some internships in the industry and quality control departments, understanding how the real industry works. Really, that's what I fell in love with and wanted to do, is be involved with the pork industry and meat especially. Never so much on live pigs. As far as working for a genetics company was never anything I thought I would do. Always figured I would work for a commercial packing plant. But there was a job posted, and it sounded like fun because it was research and it involves some travel and doing different things. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by PIC about 3 months after I graduated. So I started in PIC in 1997, and the rest is history, as they say. But it's been a great opportunity as far as getting to learn a lot of things hands-on, getting to see a lot of different processes around the world. And I myself will often say there's really only one way to kill and process a pig, but in reality, each of these major steps has lots of different ways they can do it. So understanding what works best and the different ways that things can be done that best fit a unique environment has been really cool.
Yeah, very, very practical. I find it your job. And you said you wanted to be at the like working on the pork processing plant, but somehow you help them. Somehow you are there too. So that's neat.
It's the best of both worlds. I get to work with the plants. I get to be involved, but I don't have to go into the same plant every single day. So it's the variation and the variety is one thing I love about what I'm doing today.
I'd like to know more on the second part of this, about this manual that you guys developed. I think this is gold, pure gold for the pork industry. And I think if you're okay, I mean, RMC, and for those folks that are wanting to attend, it's coming up soon. So you can visit the American Meat Association website to get to know more about this reciprocal meat conference. It's coming up soon in June, and it's going to take place in Des Moines, Iowa. We'll invite everyone and highly encourage all those folks wanting to learn more about meat science to attend. How many RMCs have you attended?
Oh goodness, not 25. I haven't gone every year, but I'm very close to 20.
Okay.
Without sitting here and calculating it out.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I think this is a great conversation. I'm sure a lot of folks needed this information to understand more about pork quality. We look forward to the next conversation, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it, and can't wait for the next one.
Thank you a lot.